In the early 1980s, Chris Gardner was sleeping in public bathrooms with his toddler son and cold-calling his way into a Wall Street career that would eventually make him a multimillionaire. Chris Gardner didn't start out on Wall Street. According to Britannica, he was trained as a Navy medic before he ever thought about finance. After leaving the military, he moved into medical equipment sales, trying to build a better life for his young family. By the early 1980s, as described by career writer Gorick Ung and other summaries of Gardner's life, he was in San Francisco, selling medical equipment and raising his toddler son with his then partner. Money was tight. The job wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't especially lucrative. Bills piled up, tensions rose at home, and that constant financial strain pushed the relationship to a breaking point. He wasn't some Wall Street insider or a top-tier graduate. At this point, Gardner had no college degree, and according to an article by Nick Conley, he had exactly what a lot of people watching this channel have: responsibility, stress, and not nearly enough income to cover it all. There's an important detail here. Gardner wasn't failing because he was lazy. He was working, he had skills, he had discipline from the Navy, but the ceiling on that path was low, and the cost of living in a city like San Francisco was high. That gap between effort and outcome set the stage for everything that came next. The turning point in Gardner's story starts with something incredibly ordinary: seeing a nice car. As recounted by Gorick Ung, one day in San Francisco, Gardner spotted a man in a shiny Ferrari. Instead of just staring and moving on, he walked up and asked a simple question: "What do you do for a living?" The driver, Bob Bridges, told him he was a stockbroker. That one moment matters because Gardner did two things most people don't. First, he let his curiosity override his intimidation. Second, he treated that encounter as the start of a conversation, not just a random flex he'd complain about later. According to Eng's account, that chance interaction led Bridges to help Gardner get a shot at an internship at a brokerage firm. Around the same period, Nick Conley notes that in 1981, Gardner landed an interview for an internship at Dean Witter Reynolds. On paper, he did not belong in that room. Conley writes that Gardner had no college degree and was competing against candidates with MBAs and experience. Yet he managed to secure one of the roughly 20 intern spots that year. This is where the myth and the reality start to split. The movie The Pursuit of Happiness turns this into a perfectly scripted destiny moment. In reality, it looks more like a pattern. Gardner repeatedly asking questions, following up, and squeezing every ounce of opportunity out of a tiny opening. He got his foot in the door, but the price of stepping through it was higher than anyone expected. Taking that internship wasn't some clean, inspirational leap. It was messy. Both Ung and Conley stress one key detail. The internship at Dean Witter Reynolds paid nothing. No salary. No safety net. Gardner went from an income, however modest, to zero in one of the most expensive cities in America, and his home life was unraveling. Nick Conley explains that just as Gardner started his internship, his partner Jackie walked out on him and their son, leaving him as a single dad. Around the same time, he was arrested for 10 days because of about $2,200 in unpaid parking tickets. When he got out of jail, Conley reports that he'd lost his apartment and nearly everything he owned. So you have this bizarre double reality. On one side, he's in a sleek office, trying to learn the language of finance, surrounded by people with degrees he doesn't have. On the other side, he's a newly single parent, with no place to live, no paycheck coming in, and debt problems literally landing him in jail. The movie dramatizes this, but the core facts are there in multiple accounts. Early 1980s, San Francisco, unpaid Dean Witter training, and, as Britannica puts it, a full year of homelessness while caring for his young son. This is the part a motivational poster never shows you. Getting your foot in the door can be brutal, especially when that door doesn't come with a paycheck. When people talk about starting from nothing, they usually don't mean this. According to Britannica, during Gardner's training period at Dean Witter in the early 1980s, He was homeless for about a year while caring for his young son. Cheyenne Bryan, writing for Smiley Movement, adds detail. In San Francisco, Gardner and his son relied on shelters, churches, and temporary accommodations to survive. One of the key supports mentioned is Glide Memorial United Methodist Church, which provided crucial help. A profile cited by My Best Self 101 paints a picture of their daily reality. For months, Gardner and his son slept wherever they could. In his office after hours, in motels when he could scrape the money together, in parks, airports, and even in a subway station bathroom. He would bathe his son by candlelight in public restrooms. Daycare happened when he could arrange it. Nothing was guaranteed. All of this while he was supposed to be performing in a competitive, unpaid internship where only a fraction of trainees would be offered a job. This is also where Gardner's perspective on homelessness starts to take shape. Smiley Movement notes that he later spoke openly about homelessness as a systemic issue, pointing to things like lack of affordable housing, low wages, and limited childcare. His own story undercuts the stereotype that homelessness only happens to people who aren't trying. He was doing everything the system asks, and still living in shelters with a toddler. So how do you compete against 19 other interns, many with MBAs, when you're sleeping on floors and in bathrooms? The answer, for Gardner, was volume and discipline. Multiple accounts, including My Best Self 101 and Gorik Ung, describe the same pattern. Gardner arrived at the office early, stayed late, and made roughly 200 cold calls a day to prospective clients. While juggling this schedule, he studied for and passed his licensing exam. My Best Self 101 emphasizes that he did this while navigating childcare, exhaustion, and the basic survival work of finding a place to sleep each night. According to Nick Conley, after 6 months of this grind, Gardner was one of only a few interns offered a full-time position at Dean Witter Reynolds. Ung adds that he was competing against 19 other interns and landed the only full-time stockbroker role available in that particular cohort. That offer didn't fix everything overnight, but it changed the trajectory. Conley notes that once he had a stable income, he could finally rent an apartment and get himself and his son out of homelessness. The myth version of this story just says, "Work hard and you'll make it." The real version adds a brutal footnote: "Work insanely hard in the right place for long enough, and if the system doesn't break you, you might get a shot." Once he had that first foothold, Gardner started to climb. Britannica outlines the big moves. After completing his training at Dean Witter and working there as a stockbroker, Gardner went on to join Bear Stearns, another major Wall Street firm. Later, he founded his own brokerage company, Gardner Rich & Co. Over time, as career writer Gorik Eng puts it, he went from homeless to multimillionaire. And that's only part of the story. In 2006, Gardner published his memoir, The Pursuit of Happiness. Britannica notes that the book became a New York Times bestseller and was adapted into the film of the same name, starring Will Smith as Gardner and Jaden Smith as his son. The movie's success was huge. Britannica points out that Will Smith received an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor for the role. Smiley Movement emphasizes that while the film dramatizes parts of his experience, it brought massive public attention to the realities of poverty and housing insecurity. Gardner used that spotlight. Through interviews, public speaking, and writing, he's highlighted the structural barriers that can push people into homelessness, even when they're working hard. So the arc goes like this: Navy medic, struggling salesman, homeless trainee, stockbroker, firm founder, best-selling author, and motivational speaker. It looks like a fairy tale when you compress it into 2 hours on screen. In real time, it was years of risk, exhaustion, and very narrow margins for error. So what do you actually do with a story like this? First, don't romanticize the suffering. Even Gardner himself, according to Smiley Movement, frames homelessness as a systemic failure. tied to things like unaffordable housing, low wages, and limited childcare, not as some noble rite of passage. It's important to be clear, most people should not and cannot risk homelessness to chase an unpaid opportunity. Gardner's path is inspirational, but it's also extreme. For every story like his, there are countless others where the gamble doesn't pay off. But buried inside his experience is a practical lesson you can use. Gorik Ung distills it into a simple rule. Get whatever foot you can in the door, then prove yourself. Gardner couldn't control his lack of a degree. He couldn't control the job market. He couldn't control that his internship was unpaid. What he could control was asking questions when he saw that Ferrari, following up on a weak tie, Bob Bridges, until it became an actual opportunity. Accepting an entry point that looked small and unglamorous, and then outworking everyone inside it. Nick Conley quotes Gardner describing his mindset during these years. The future was uncertain. There were many hurdles, but as long as he kept moving forward, one foot in front of the other, he could quiet the voices telling him he wasn't good enough. Most of us won't live his exact story, but almost all of us will face some version of this choice. Stay where it's safe and stagnant, or take a smaller, riskier door that could lead somewhere very different. The key is to do what Gardner didn't have the luxury to do: manage the risk. Build even a small cash cushion. Negotiate for something, anything, paid if you can. Line up roommates, side income, support systems. Learn from his determination, not from the desperation he was forced into. Chris Gardner's path from homelessness to stockbroker isn't a blueprint to copy. It's a reminder that your real leverage often comes from getting any foot in the right door, then relentlessly proving yourself inside it, while managing the risk so your pursuit of opportunity doesn't destroy your basic stability. If you're staring at a risky career move right now, an internship, a pay cut, a total pivot, hit subscribe. In upcoming episodes, we'll break down more real money stories into concrete strategies so you can open new doors without blowing up your life in the process.